The chapel doors stood open like a mouth waiting to swallow her whole. Adeline Crowe had been standing at that altar for 17 minutes, long enough for the murmurs to start, long enough for pity to curdle into something uglier. He wasn't coming. Everyone knew it before she did. The flowers in her hands trembled, then stilled. She could feel 300 pairs of eyes boring into her back, could hear the whispers spreading like poison through the pews. This was supposed to be her beginning. Instead, it became the day she learned exactly how cruel mercy could be. If you want to see how a woman rises from the ashes of her own wedding, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Adeline's story travels. The morning had started with rain. Adeline should have taken it as a sign, but she'd been too busy trying to breathe in a corset laced tight enough to crack ribs. Her mother had pulled the strings herself, yanking hard enough to make Adeline gasp, muttering something about presentation and first impressions. As if Marcus Wellborn needed impressing. As if he hadn't already proposed 3 months ago in her father's study, with all the romance of a business transaction, which, Adeline supposed, was exactly what it was. "Stop fidgeting," her mother hissed, adjusting the veil for the 4th time. "You look like you're attending a funeral, not your own wedding." Adeline wanted to say that maybe there wasn't much difference, but she'd learned years ago that her mother didn't appreciate honesty. She appreciated compliance, smooth surfaces, the appearance of perfection, even when everything underneath was rotting. The veil settled over her face like a shroud. "There," her mother said, stepping back with a critical eye. "Beautiful. Marcus is a lucky man." Adeline looked at herself in the mirror. A stranger in white lace and silk, drowning in fabric that cost more than most families earned in a year. Her father had spared no expense. Of course he hadn't. This wedding wasn't about her. It was about the Wellborn name, the merger of 2 failing estates, the salvation of the Crowe family finances through her womb and her silence. She was 22 years old, and she'd already been sold. "The carriage is ready," her father called from downstairs. His voice carried that particular edge it always had when money was involved. Sharp, anxious, desperate. The ride to the chapel took 15 minutes. Adeline spent them staring out the window, watching the city roll past in shades of gray. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still slick, reflecting the morning light in fractured patterns. She thought about running, just opening the carriage door and disappearing into the crowd. But where would she go? She had no money of her own, no skills beyond needlework and polite conversation. Her entire life had been designed to lead to this moment, this transfer of ownership from father to husband. The chapel loomed ahead, all Gothic spires and stained glass, too grand, too public. Her father had insisted on inviting half of society, turning what should have been a private affair into a spectacle. Proof of the Crowe family's continued relevance, even as their coffers emptied. "Remember to smile," her mother whispered as they stepped down from the carriage. "And for heaven's sake, don't cry. It ruins the complexion." Adeline didn't feel like crying. She felt nothing at all, just a cold, distant numbness as she took her father's arm and walked toward the entrance. The chapel was packed. She could see them through the doorway, rows upon rows of faces she barely knew, dressed in their finest, here to witness her sacrifice. The orchestra was playing something soft and anticipatory. The flowers were everywhere, cascading from every available surface in an explosion of white and cream. It smelled like a garden, like a graveyard. "Ready?" her father asked. He wasn't really asking. Adeline nodded because there was nothing else to do. They stepped inside. The music swelled. Every head turned. She could feel the weight of their attention like a physical thing, pressing down on her shoulders. She kept her eyes forward, focused on the altar where Marcus should have been standing, the altar where no one stood. At first she thought he was just late. Marcus was always late. It was one of his many charming flaws, according to her mother. Adeline's father guided her down the aisle with steady, measured steps, his hand tight on her arm. She could hear the rustle of fabric as people shifted in their seats, the confused murmurs starting to build. Still, no Marcus. They reached the front. The officiant, a thin, nervous man with a receding hairline, looked profoundly uncomfortable. He kept glancing at the side door as if Marcus might materialize any second. "Perhaps we should wait a moment," he suggested quietly. Adeline's father nodded, his jaw clenched so tight she could hear his teeth grinding. They stood there, waiting. The orchestra had stopped playing. The silence was worse than the music. 1 minute passed, then 2, then 5. The murmurs grew louder. Adeline could make out individual words now: late, rude, inappropriate. Her mother appeared at her elbow, face pale. "Where is he?" she whispered. Not to Adeline. To no one. 10 minutes. The officiant disappeared through the side door, presumably to check the preparation room. He came back shaking his head. "He's not... There's no one..." 15 minutes. Someone in the back pews laughed, a short, shocked sound that cut off immediately. Adeline's hands had gone numb. The flowers she was holding, lilies, Marcus's favorite, were starting to wilt in her grip. 17 minutes. That's when she knew. He wasn't late. He wasn't coming. He had left her standing at the altar in front of everyone who mattered, everyone who would spread this story through every drawing room and dinner party for the next decade. The pity started first. She could see it in their faces, that awful, condescending sympathy. Poor girl. Poor, pathetic girl. But pity had teeth. It was already transforming into something else. Schadenfreude, judgment, the particular cruelty that society reserved for women who failed to secure their men. "Adeline," her father said, his voice strangled. "We should..." "No!" The word came out stronger than she expected. She turned to look at him, this man who had sold her like livestock, who had promised her to a man who couldn't even show up to claim her. "I'm leaving," she said. Her mother's hand shot out, gripping her wrist. "You can't. Everyone is watching." "I know." Adeline pulled free. "Let them watch." She turned and walked, not back down the aisle. That felt too much like retreat. Instead, she went through the side door, the one the officiant had used. It led to a small antechamber and then out to the street. Her heels clicked against the marble, echoing in the sudden silence. Behind her, the whispers erupted into full conversation. She could hear her mother's voice rising in panic, her father's angry muttering. She didn't stop. She pushed through the outer door and stumbled into the street, still clutching those dying lilies. The air hit her face like a slap. She dragged in a breath, then another. The corset made it difficult, but she didn't care. She was outside. She was away from those eyes, those voices, that suffocating pity. A carriage rattled past, splashing water from a puddle. The spray hit her dress, leaving muddy streaks across the white silk. Adeline looked down at the stains and felt something crack open in her chest. Not tears, something harder. "Miss Crow?" She spun around. A young man was standing in the chapel doorway. Thomas something, one of Marcus's friends. He looked deeply uncomfortable. Do you need assistance?" "No," Adeline said. Then, because she couldn't help herself, "Where is he?" Thomas shifted his weight. I'm not sure I should..." "Where's Marcus?" The question came out flat, hard. Thomas flinched. "He left town last night," he said finally. "Took the late train to Dover. There was a woman with him. Not you." The world tilted slightly. Adeline steadied herself against the stone wall. "How long?" she asked. "I'm sorry?" "How long has he been seeing her?" Thomas looked like he wanted to disappear. "I don't know. A few months, maybe? Look, I really shouldn't..." "Thank you," Adeline cut him off. "You can go." He hesitated, then retreated back inside. Adeline was alone again, alone in a ruined wedding dress on a gray street corner, holding flowers meant for a man who had been unfaithful for months, who had waited until the very last moment to humiliate her. The rage came then, hot and clean and clarifying. She threw the lilies into the gutter and watched them land in the dirty water. Then she started walking. She didn't know where she was going, didn't care. She just needed to move, to put distance between herself and that chapel, those people, that life she'd almost been forced into. Her feet carried her through the city, away from the fashionable district and into neighborhoods where the buildings crowded closer together, where the air smelled like coal smoke and baking bread. People stared at her, a woman in a wedding dress, stalking through the streets like a ghost, but no one stopped her. Eventually she found herself at the river. The water was high from the rain, moving fast. She stood on the bank and looked at her reflection, distorted, barely recognizable. "You look lost." Adeline turned. An old woman was sitting on a nearby bench, feeding breadcrumbs to pigeons. She had the kind of face that had seen everything and been surprised by none of it. "I am," Adeline said. "Wedding didn't go well, I take it." It should have been funny. It wasn't. "No." The woman nodded sagely. "Men are bastards. Every last one of them. Present company excluded, of course, but only because I'm a woman." She tossed another handful of crumbs. "What are you going to do about it?" "I don't know." "Well, you've got two choices as I see it. You can go back to that chapel, let them wrap you up in sympathy and shame, spend the rest of your life as the woman who got left at the altar, or—" She paused, looking at Adeline with sharp, knowing eyes. "You can decide that this is the last time anyone makes a fool of you." Adeline stared at her. "It's not that simple." "No," the woman agreed. "It's not. But nothing worth doing ever is." She stood, scattering the remaining breadcrumbs. "Here's the thing about rock bottom, dear. It's solid. You can build on it." She walked away, leaving Adeline alone with the river and her thoughts. The sun was setting by the time Adeline made it back home. The house was dark except for a single light in the study. Her father's domain. She could see him through the window, slumped over his desk with a bottle of whiskey for company. She didn't go in. Instead, she climbed the back stairs to her room, the way the servants did. Her wedding dress dragged behind her, filthy now, torn at the hem. She looked at herself in the mirror one last time. The woman staring back looked nothing like the girl who'd put on this dress that morning. That girl had been scared, compliant, willing to trade her life for her family's debts. This woman was something else, something sharper. Adeline unlaced the corset herself, her fingers working at the knots until she could finally breathe. She peeled off the dress and left it in a heap on the floor. Then she pulled on the simplest thing she owned, a plain gray dress, wool, practical, and sat down at her desk. She had no plan, no money, no prospects. Society would tear her apart. She knew that already. The invitations would stop coming. The friends would disappear. She would become a cautionary tale, a warning to other young women about the dangers of failing to secure their future. But she was done being afraid. Adeline pulled out a piece of paper and began to write. Not to Marcus. He didn't deserve her words. To herself. A list. A promise. I will never be powerless again. I will never rely on someone else for my survival. I will make my own way, no matter what it costs. She underlined that last line twice. Outside, she could hear her mother's carriage returning, the clatter of wheels on cobblestones, the sharp voice calling for the housekeeper. There would be a scene. There would be tears and recriminations and demands to know what Adeline had been thinking, leaving like that. Let there be a scene. Adeline was done performing. She folded the paper carefully and tucked it into the drawer. Then she lay down on her bed, still fully dressed, and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Tomorrow, she would figure out how to survive in a world that wanted her to disappear. But tonight, she let herself feel it, all the anger and hurt and humiliation. She let it burn through her, hot and terrible, until there was nothing left but ash and resolve. The girl who had walked into that chapel was dead. Good. She had been weak, afraid, willing to settle for a life of quiet misery. The woman who walked out was something new, something forged in public humiliation and private rage. Society thought this was her ending. They were wrong. This was just the beginning. The scandal lasted exactly 3 weeks before something better came along to feed the gossip mill. Lady Pemberton caught with her husband's secretary, a truly spectacular affair involving blackmail and illegitimate twins. Adeline watched her social death get eclipsed by someone else's ruin and felt nothing but cold relief. Her mother stopped speaking to her on day 4, just looked through her at breakfast as if Adeline had become a ghost haunting their dining room. Her father lasted longer, made it to day 9 before he locked himself in his study with the whiskey and the mounting bills, emerging only to inform Adeline that she'd destroyed them all. The Wellborns are demanding their deposits back, he'd said, his face gray. Every penny we spent on that wedding, money we don't have. Then don't pay them, Adeline had replied. He'd looked at her like she'd suggested burning the house down. Maybe she had. On day 12, the invitations stopped coming. On day 15, her best friend since childhood, Margaret, who'd promised to love her forever, crossed the street to avoid her. On day 18, Adeline sold her jewelry. All of it. The pearls her grandmother left her, the ruby brooch she'd received for her 21st birthday, every piece of pretty metal she'd been given to make her look valuable. The jeweler counted out the money with sympathetic eyes. It wasn't enough to live on forever, but it was enough to start. "What will you do?" he'd asked. "Survive," Adeline said. By week 3, her father had drunk himself into a rage that ended with him throwing a decanter at the wall and screaming that she was no daughter of his. Her mother had simply nodded in agreement, as if he'd stated an obvious truth. Adeline had packed a single trunk, the gray dress, 2 others just as plain, her mother's old accounting books that no one had touched in years, and that folded paper with her promises written in angry script. She left at dawn. No tearful goodbyes and no dramatic confrontation. She just walked out the door and didn't look back. The boarding house was in a part of the city where former debutantes didn't venture. Mrs. Garrison, the landlady, took Adeline's money without questions and showed her to a room barely larger than a closet. It had a bed, a wash basin, and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. "Rent's due 1st of the month," Mrs. Garrison said. "No men, no noise after 10, no trouble." "Understood," Adeline replied. That first night, she lay in the narrow bed and listened to the sounds of her new world, voices through thin walls, footsteps on the stairs, the distant clatter of the city that never quite slept. She thought about the bedroom she'd left behind with its silk curtains and 4-poster bed, and felt absolutely nothing. The money from the jewelry lasted 4 months. Adeline spent it carefully, eating the cheapest food she could find, mending her dresses until they were more patches than original fabric. She took her mother's accounting books and taught herself estate management, reading by candlelight until her eyes burned. Numbers made sense. Numbers didn't lie or leave you at altars. She also learned that finding work as a ruined woman was nearly impossible. "We don't hire your kind," the first estate manager told her, not even bothering to look up from his ledger. "My kind?" Adeline asked. "Women with reputations. Bad luck, you understand." She understood. She also understood that she needed to eat, and bad luck didn't pay rent. The 15th rejection came from a sour-faced man who looked her up and down like she was something he'd scraped off his boot. "A woman managing an estate? That's not natural. Besides, everyone knows what you are. And what am I? A scandal. The girl left at the altar. You think I want that association? You'd scare off the tenants." Adeline had left his office with her hands shaking, but not from fear, from rage. Because he was right about one thing, everyone knew. Her name had become shorthand for failure, for public humiliation, for every cautionary tale mothers told their daughters about securing their futures. The money ran out on a Tuesday. Adeline sat in her room and counted her remaining coins, 2 shillings, 3 pennies, enough for maybe 3 days of food if she was very careful. After that, nothing. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt a strange, sharp clarity. This was it, the moment where she either found a way forward or gave up and crawled back to her parents, begging for scraps and forgiveness she didn't want. The thought lasted exactly 3 seconds before she dismissed it. She'd rather starve. On Wednesday, she walked into the offices of Ashford Estate Management without an appointment. The secretary, a pinched woman with spectacles, looked up in irritation. "Do you have a scheduled meeting?" "No," Adeline said. "But I'm not leaving until I speak with Mr. Ashford." "That's not how—" "I can wait." She sat down in the chair by the door and pulled out one of her accounting books. The secretary stared at her, then sighed and went back to her work. Adeline stayed there for 6 hours. She watched clerks come and go, listened to snippets of conversation about crop rotations and tenant disputes. When the secretary left for lunch, Adeline stayed. When the office started to empty at day's end, Adeline stayed. Finally, a door opened and a man emerged, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors. He stopped when he saw her. "You're still here?" "I told your secretary I'd wait." Mr. Ashford studied her for a long moment. Most people give up after an hour. I'm not most people. Something flickered in his expression. Amusement, maybe, or curiosity. Come in then. You've earned 5 minutes of my time through sheer stubbornness. His office was cluttered with maps and ledgers, papers stacked on every surface. He cleared a chair for her and sat behind his desk. Well, he said, what's so important you'd waste a day in my waiting room? I want a job. He laughed, not cruelly, but genuinely surprised. A job. Doing what? Estate management. I've been studying ledgers, learning property law, teaching myself surveying techniques. I can read crop reports, manage tenant relations, handle accounts. You're that Crow girl, he interrupted. The one from the wedding. Adeline's jaw tightened. Yes. So you thought you'd become an estate manager? That's a man's work. So I've been told, repeatedly. But I notice your ledgers are 3 months behind. She pointed to the stacks on his desk. And you've got reports from at least 5 different properties mixed together without any filing system. Your accounts receivable are a mess. Mr. Ashford's eyebrows rose. You got all that from sitting in my waiting room? Your clerks talk, loudly. Adeline leaned forward. I'll work for half what you'd pay a man. No, a quarter. Give me the worst property you have, the one nobody wants to deal with. If I can't turn it around in 3 months, you fire me and pay me nothing. That's a terrible deal for you. It's a chance. That's all I need. He stared at her for a long time, his fingers drumming on the desk. Then he pulled out a folder and slid it across to her. Thornfield, he said. Small estate about 40 miles north. The owner died 6 months ago, left it to some nephew who doesn't give a damn. The place is falling apart, tenants are 3 months behind on rent. The land agent disappeared with half the winter funds. It's a disaster. Adeline opened the folder and scanned the papers. He wasn't exaggerating. Thornfield was bleeding money, the reports were chaotic, and the whole operation looked like it was held together with wishes and spite. I'll take it, she said. Mr. Ashford shook his head slowly. You're either very brave or very stupid. Desperate, Adeline corrected. But I'll take that over comfortable any day. She started at Thornfield the following Monday. The estate was worse than the reports suggested. The main house was magnificent in the way that ruins often were. All crumbling stone and overgrown gardens, beauty dying slowly from neglect. The tenant cottages were in slightly better shape, but not by much. Roofs leaked, fences had fallen, and the fields looked like they hadn't been properly managed in years. The steward who met her at the door was a squat man named Perkins, with suspicious eyes and breath that smelled like stale beer. You're the new manager? He looked her up and down. Ashford's having a laugh, sending a woman. Mr. Ashford sent someone who can read a ledger, Adeline replied. Can you? Perkins' face went red. I've been running this place for... Running it into the ground? Yes, I saw the reports. Where are the books? Now see here. The books, Mr. Perkins, unless you'd prefer to explain to the owner why his property is worthless. He glared at her but led her to a small office off the main hall. The ledgers were worse than she'd imagined. Entries missing, numbers that didn't add up, entire months unaccounted for. Either Perkins was incompetent or he'd been skimming, probably both. Adeline spent the first week just trying to understand what she was dealing with. She walked every inch of the property, talked to the tenants, examined the fields and the livestock. The tenants were wary of her at first. A woman in charge was strange enough, but a woman with her reputation was something else entirely. You're that girl, one of them said bluntly. An older woman named Mrs. Hewitt, who ran the dairy with her 3 sons. The one who got jilted. Yes, Adeline said. I am. Shame that. Man's a bastard. Agreed. Now, about your milk production. Mrs. Hewitt blinked. You want to talk about the dairy? I want to talk about why your output dropped 20% last quarter when your herd size increased. That got her attention. They spent an hour going over the numbers, and by the end of it, Mrs. Hewitt was actually smiling. You know your business, she admitted. Didn't expect that. Everyone expects me to be useless, Adeline said. I've stopped caring. Word spread. The weird new manager who actually understood farming, who didn't treat the tenants like idiots, who could look at a field and tell you exactly what was wrong with the drainage. Within 2 weeks, they stopped calling her that jilted girl and started calling her Miss Crow. Small victory, but Adeline would take it. Perkins was a bigger problem. He fought her on everything, questioned her decisions, undermined her authority, made it clear he thought she was a temporary inconvenience. Adeline documented everything, every discrepancy in the books, every time he showed up to work drunk, every instance of money that couldn't be accounted for. On week 3, she fired him. "You can't do that," he sputtered. "You're just some girl playing at—" "I'm the estate manager," Adeline interrupted. "And you've been stealing. I have the evidence right here." She tapped the ledger. "You can leave quietly, or I can send this to the magistrate. Your choice." He left, loudly, cursing her name and her reputation, and every woman who'd ever had the audacity to think she could do a man's job. The tenants watched him go with barely concealed relief. "About time," Mrs. Hewitt muttered. Adeline hired a new steward, a young man named Thomas Birch, who'd been working as an assistant on a neighboring estate. He was green but honest, and he actually listened when she explained what needed to be done. "You really think we can turn this place around?" he asked, looking at the state of the books. "We don't have a choice," Adeline said. "We either fix it or it dies." They worked 12-hour days. Adeline learned to negotiate with suppliers, haggle over prices, sweet-talk creditors into giving them more time. She discovered she was good at it, better than good. She could look at a failing system and see exactly where the problems were, could reorganize labor and resources until things actually functioned. The first month, they broke even. The second month, they showed a small profit. By the third month, Thornfield was actually running properly, and Mr. Ashford came to inspect. He walked the property with her, examined the books, talked to the tenants. When he was done, he looked at her with something that might have been respect. "I'll be honest," he said. "I didn't think you'd last a week." Neither did Perkins. Perkins was an idiot. Mr. Ashford handed her an envelope. "That's your wages for the 3 months. Full pay, not the quarter you promised to work for." Adeline opened it and stared at the amount. It was more money than she'd seen since selling her jewelry. "Mr. Ashford, you earned it. More than earned it." He paused. "I have another property that needs attention. Bigger than this one, more complicated. The owner's been looking for a manager for 6 months. Can't find anyone competent. I'd like to recommend you." "You'd recommend a woman?" "I'd recommend someone who gets results." He smiled slightly. "What you are or aren't is irrelevant to the work. Took me 3 months to figure that out. Better late than never." The new position paid 3 times what Thornfield had. Adeline took it without hesitation. Over the next 2 years, she built a reputation. Not as the girl left at the altar, as the manager who could save failing estates, who understood land and money and people in ways that most men twice her age couldn't match. The work was brutal, the hours endless, but Adeline threw herself into it with a single-minded intensity that left no room for anything else. She didn't make friends, didn't attend social events, lived in boarding houses, and spent her rare free time studying contracts and property law. She was alone, but alone felt safer than the alternative. Then she met the Duke. It was an accident, really. Adeline had been hired to assess a property adjacent to the Hale family holdings, a mess of disputed boundaries and conflicting tenant claims. She'd spent the morning surveying the land when a voice called out behind her. "You're trespassing." Adeline turned to find a man on horseback watching her. Tall, dark-haired, with the kind of aristocratic bearing that screamed old money and older titles. He was dressed for riding, nothing ostentatious, but everything about him spoke of wealth so deeply ingrained it didn't need to announce itself. "I'm surveying the Ashford property," she said. "This is the boundary line." "That's disputed territory. Has been for 20 years. "Not according to the land registry." Adeline pulled out her map. "The original deed places the boundary at the oak tree, which puts me exactly where I should be." The man dismounted and walked over, looking at her documents. "You're an estate manager?" "Yes." "For Ashford?" "Currently. Why?" He studied her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. Not threatening, just assessing, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "You're Adeline Crow," he said finally. Her stomach dropped. "If that's a problem—" "It's not. I'm Rowan Hale." He offered his hand. We should probably discuss this boundary dispute before our respective employers end up in court. Adeline shook his hand, wary. Duke Rowan Hale. She knew the name, everyone did. One of the wealthiest landowners in the region, notoriously private, unmarried, despite being well into his 30s. The gossip sheets called him the Ice Duke because of his reserved nature and apparent disinterest in society's games. I'm open to discussion, she said carefully. They spent the next hour going over maps and deeds, arguing about property lines and historical precedents. Rowan was sharp, caught details she'd missed, pointed out flaws in her reasoning that made her reconsider her position. It was the first real intellectual challenge she'd had in months, and she found herself actually enjoying it. We're not going to resolve this today, Rowan said eventually, but I think there's a compromise possible. Are you free tomorrow to continue? Adeline hesitated. This is my employer's land, Your Grace. I should bring them if you want, or don't. I'm more interested in finding a solution than standing on ceremony. He mounted his horse. 2:00. My estate office. He rode off before she could respond. Adeline reported the conversation to Mr. Ashford, who laughed so hard he nearly fell out of his chair. Rowan Hale wants to negotiate with you directly. That man doesn't give anyone the time of day. What did you do? Argued with him about property boundaries? Well, keep doing it. If you can get him to settle this dispute without lawyers, I'll double your salary. The negotiations took 3 weeks. Not because the dispute was particularly complex, but because Rowan kept finding reasons to extend the discussions. Questions about adjacent properties, hypotheticals about future development, detailed debates about land management strategies that had nothing to do with the boundary line. Adeline realized what he was doing about halfway through week 2. You're not actually interested in this fence placement, are you? She said, looking up from yet another map. Rowan didn't even have the grace to look embarrassed. The fence placement is fascinating. It's a fence, a very important fence. Your Grace, Rowan, he corrected. We've been arguing about dirt for 2 weeks. I think we can dispense with the titles. Adeline set down her pen. Why are you doing this? Doing what? This. Prolonging discussions that could have been settled in a day. Making excuses to keep meeting. He was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, because you're interesting. I'm a scandal. You're a woman who rebuilt her life after society tried to bury her. That's considerably more interesting than most of the people I meet. Adeline didn't know what to say to that. She'd gotten used to people seeing her as either a cautionary tale or a curiosity, never as simply interesting. I should go, she said, standing. We haven't finished the— Yes, we have. The boundary stays at the oak tree, you get the water rights to the northern stream, and both properties agree to shared maintenance of the access road. That's fair, and you know it. Rowan smiled, a real smile, not the polite mask he usually wore. You're right, it is fair. He paused. Will you have dinner with me? No. Why not? Because you're a duke, and I'm— She gestured vaguely at herself. This? An estate manager? A ruined woman, or did you miss that part? I didn't miss it. I don't care about it. Rowan stood. I care that you can talk about land management for hours without boring me to death. I care that you argue instead of agreeing just to be polite. I care that you're brilliant at what you do, and you don't apologize for it. Adeline felt something crack in her chest, a dangerous softness she couldn't afford. You don't know me. Then let me. Why? The word came out harder than she intended. What do you want from me? Conversation, company, someone who sees me as something other than a title or a fortune. He took a step closer. Is that so impossible? Yes, Adeline wanted to say. Because I trusted once, and it destroyed me. Because I've built walls for a reason, and you're asking me to tear them down. Because you're dangerous in ways you don't even realize. But what she said was, I can't. She left before he could argue, before she could change her mind, before that crack in her chest could spread into something that might break her all over again. Rowan didn't give up. Over the next months, he found reasons to cross her path, business inquiries that required her expertise, chance meetings at properties she was surveying, invitations to consult on his own estate management, requests she couldn't refuse without insulting a valuable client. He was patient, never pushed, never demanded, just present, asking her opinion on crop rotations, debating the merits of different irrigation systems, treating her like an equal instead of a woman with a past. It was terrifying. "You're spending a lot of time with the Duke," Mr. Ashford observed one day. "People are starting to talk." "Let them talk," Adeline said. "They always do. He's unmarried, wealthy, interested in you. He's a client." "Adeline," Mr. Ashford's voice was gentler than usual. "You've spent 3 years punishing yourself. Maybe it's time to stop." "I'm not punishing myself. I'm protecting myself." "From what? A man who clearly respects you?" "From hope," Adeline thought. "From the possibility of wanting something that could be taken away." 6 months after their first meeting, Rowan invited her to tour his main estate. It was a legitimate business request. He was considering restructuring his tenant agreements and wanted her assessment. But when she arrived, he led her not to the office, but to the gardens. "This isn't about tenant agreements," Adeline said. "No," Rowan agreed. "It's not." They walked in silence for a while. The gardens were beautiful, carefully maintained but not ostentatious, designed for peace rather than show. Adeline found herself relaxing despite her wariness. "I don't understand you," she said finally. "Why me? You could have anyone." "I don't want anyone. I want you. You want the idea of me, the challenge. But if you actually knew, I know you wake up at 5 every morning and work until you're too exhausted to think," Rowan interrupted. "I know you've turned 3 failing estates profitable in 3 years. I know you'd rather argue about drainage systems than make small talk. I know you're terrified of trusting anyone because someone broke that trust so badly, you're still bleeding from it." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "What else do I need to know?" "Everything," Adeline wanted to say. "How I'm broken in ways you can't see. How I wake up sometimes and still feel like I'm standing at that altar, waiting for someone who's never coming. How I've built my entire life around never being vulnerable again." "I can't be what you need," she said instead. "What I need is someone who challenges me, who doesn't care about my title or my money, who looks at me like I'm just a man instead of a prize to be won." His voice was quiet, serious. "I need you to stop deciding what I want and let me tell you." "And what do you want?" "You. Exactly as you are, sharp edges and all." The crack in her chest widened. Adeline felt panic rising, familiar and overwhelming. This was how it started. The belief that someone could want her for herself. The hope that maybe this time would be different. And then the betrayal, the abandonment, the proof that she'd been a fool to trust at all. "I have to go," she said. "Adeline, I'm sorry. I can't do this." She ran. Actually ran like a coward, leaving Rowan standing alone in his perfect garden while she fled to the safety of her work, her walls, her carefully constructed isolation. That night, lying in her narrow boarding house bed, Adeline pulled out that old folded paper with her promises. 3 years ago, she'd vowed to never be powerless again. She'd kept that promise. She'd built a life, a career, a reputation based entirely on her own strength. But she'd also promised herself she'd never be vulnerable again. And Rowan Hale made her feel vulnerable in ways that terrified her more than poverty or scandal ever had. The next morning, a letter arrived. Rowan's handwriting, neat and precise. "I'm not him. I won't leave. But I also won't force you to trust me. The choice is yours, and I'll respect whatever you decide. Just know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Adeline read it 3 times, then burned it in her candle flame and watched the words turn to ash. She spent the next month avoiding him, turned down his business inquiries, found excuses to work on properties far from his holdings, built her walls higher and stronger than ever. It should have worked. It didn't. Because the truth she couldn't escape was this. Rowan Hale had seen her at her sharpest, her most guarded, her least lovable. And he'd wanted her anyway. Not despite her edges, but because of them. And that terrified her more than anything else in the world. The irony was that Adeline had never been more successful, and she'd never felt more like she was suffocating. By the 4th year after the wedding that never was, she managed 6 estates across 3 counties. Her reputation had shifted, not erased, never erased, but transformed into something else. The abandoned bride had become the woman who didn't need anyone, who could salvage failing properties and turn skeptical landowners into believers. She had money now, real money, saved and invested carefully. She could afford better lodgings, better clothes, a life that looked almost respectable from the outside. From the inside, it felt like living in a cage she'd built herself. Rowan stopped sending letters after that last one, stopped manufacturing reasons to cross her path. For 2 months, Adeline told herself this was what she wanted: distance, safety, the return to her carefully ordered solitude. She threw herself into work with renewed intensity, taking on an impossible project in the eastern counties just to keep herself too busy to think. It worked until it didn't. The breaking point came on a Wednesday in late November. Adeline was reviewing accounts in a cramped estate office when Mr. Ashford arrived unannounced, his face grave. "We need to talk," he said, closing the door behind him. Adeline set down her pen. "What's wrong?" "Lord Ashford is selling the business." The words took a moment to register. "What?" "His health is failing. He wants to retire, spend whatever time he has left with his family. The new owner takes over in 3 months. Mr. Ashford sat heavily in the chair across from her. "He's bringing his own managers, all of them men. I'm sorry, Adeline." The floor seemed to tilt. "He can't. I've built this. Half the properties we manage are only profitable because—" "I know. I told him that. He doesn't care. Says a woman in the position makes the firm look unserious." Mr. Ashford's expression was bitter. "I fought him on it. Lost." Adeline felt that old, familiar rage building in her chest. 4 years of work, of proving herself over and over, and it still wasn't enough. It would never be enough. "What are my options?" she asked, keeping her voice level. "You could try to find another firm willing to hire you, though most won't, not for management positions." He paused. "Or you could start your own business. You have the capital, the experience, the connections." "A woman running an estate management firm? No one would take me seriously." "Some would, the ones who care about results more than propriety." Mr. Ashford leaned forward. "You've spent 4 years making other people wealthy. Maybe it's time to make yourself wealthy instead." After he left, Adeline sat alone in the office as the afternoon light faded. Starting her own firm was a gamble. A massive, terrifying gamble that could end with her losing everything she'd fought to build. But staying meant accepting that no matter how good she was, no matter how hard she worked, she would always be disposable because of what lived between her legs instead of her ears. She pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and started calculating how much capital she'd need, which properties might be willing to take a chance on her, what it would cost to establish an office, hire staff, survive the inevitable lean months at the start. The numbers worked. Barely, but they worked. Adeline was still running calculations when someone knocked on the door. She looked up, expecting Mr. Ashford returning with more bad news. It was Rowan. He looked different, tired, like he hadn't been sleeping well. His coat was dusted with road dirt, suggesting he'd ridden hard to get here. He stood in the doorway, silent, just looking at her. "How did you know where to find me?" Adeline asked finally. "Ashford's secretary, I may have bribed her." Rowan stepped inside, closing the door. "I heard about the sale. Are you all right?" "I'm fine." "You're not. I can see it in your face." Adeline set down her pen with more force than necessary. "What do you want, Rowan?" "To help." "I don't need help." "Everyone needs help sometimes, even you." He moved closer, stopping a few feet away. "What are you going to do?" "Start my own firm. Take the risk. Probably fail spectacularly and prove everyone right about women being unfit for business." "You won't fail." "You don't know that." "I know you." Rowan pulled a chair over and sat down without invitation. "I know you turn failing estates profitable. I know you're smarter than half the men in this business and work twice as hard as the other half. I know you'd rather die than quit." "That's not help. That's flattery." "It's truth." He leaned back, studying her. "What if I became your first client?" Adeline stared at him. "You're not serious." "Completely serious. I've been wanting to restructure my tenant agreements for years, but I don't trust anyone enough to hand them that kind of control over my holdings." He paused. Except you. This is charity. This is business. I need someone competent. You need clients. It's practical. His eyes held hers. Unless you're going to let pride destroy what could be a mutually beneficial arrangement. He had her there. Rowan Hale's estates were massive. If she could prove herself capable of managing them, other landowners would follow. It was exactly the kind of prestigious client a new firm needed to survive. It was also a trap. Not the malicious kind, but the dangerous kind where she'd be tied to him professionally, seeing him regularly, watching that careful patience in his eyes as he waited for her to stop running. Why? Adeline asked. Why do you keep doing this? Doing what? Showing up, offering help, acting like I'm worth the trouble. Rowan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. My father died when I was 16, left me with a title, estates I had no idea how to manage, and everyone waiting for me to fail. For 3 years, I drowned, made terrible decisions, trusted the wrong people, watched everything my family built start to crumble. He stood, walking to the window. Then I met a man named Henry Walsh. He was a steward, no family name, nothing that made him important by society's standards. But he was brilliant. He saw I was drowning, and instead of letting me sink, he taught me how to swim. Spent years showing me how to actually run estates, how to see through the people trying to take advantage of me, how to trust my own judgment. Rowan turned to face her. He saved my life. Not dramatically, just by believing I was worth saving when everyone else had written me off as another aristocratic disappointment. I never got to properly thank him. He died 5 years ago. I'm sorry, Adeline said quietly. My point is, I know what it's like to be drowning while everyone watches. And I know what it's like when someone throws you a rope instead of stones. He moved back to the desk. So yes, I keep showing up. Because you're worth showing up for. And I'm tired of watching you punish yourself for someone else's cruelty. The crack in Adeline's chest widened into a chasm. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him he didn't understand, that his kindness was dangerous because it made her want things she couldn't afford to want. Instead, she heard herself say, All right. Rowan blinked. All right? You can be my first client, strictly professional. I'll draw up a proper contract, standard rates, everything formal. She met his eyes. But that's all this is. Business. Understood. He smiled slightly. Though I reserve the right to continue being annoyingly persistent about the rest. Noted and ignored. Well, after he left, Adeline sat in the gathering darkness and tried to convince herself she hadn't just made a catastrophic mistake. Starting the firm was harder than she'd anticipated. Finding office space that didn't cost a fortune, hiring a clerk who wouldn't quit the moment he realized his employer was a woman, printing letterhead and business cards that looked legitimate. Every step felt like pushing uphill through mud. The worst part was the gossip. It started the moment she hung her shingle. Crow Estate Management. Whispers spread through professional circles like wildfire. The abandoned bride starting her own business. How desperate, how pathetic, how certain to fail. Adeline gritted her teeth and kept working. Rowan's contract was comprehensive. He wanted a full restructuring of his tenant system, new agreements that were fairer but also more efficient, a complete overhaul that would take months. It was exactly the kind of complex, high-profile work that could make or break her reputation. No pressure. They met weekly at his estate office. Rowan insisted on it, said he wanted to understand every decision, to learn the reasoning behind her recommendations. It forced them into close quarters, hours spent debating crop rotations and rent structures, arguing over details until they found solutions neither had considered alone. It should have been purely professional. It wasn't. You're wrong about the northern tenants, Adeline said one afternoon, 3 weeks into the project. Raising their rent now will just drive them away. The land is worth more than they're paying. The land is worth nothing if no one's farming it. She spread out the maps. Look, half of them have been there for generations. They know the soil, the weather patterns, how to get the best yields. You chase them off with higher rent, you'll get new tenants who don't have that knowledge. Production will drop. Rowan studied the maps, his brow furrowed. So what do you suggest? Keep the rent stable, but add productivity clauses. They meet certain yields, they get bonuses, they exceed expectations, you share the profit, gives them incentive to stay and work harder. That's actually brilliant. Don't sound so surprised. He laughed. I'm not. I'm just remembering why I hired you. His expression shifted, becoming more serious. You see people as assets, not just numbers on a ledger. That's rare. People are assets. Treating them well is just good business. Is that why you do it? Because it's good business? Adeline looked up from the maps. Rowan was watching her with that intensity he sometimes had, like he was trying to read something written in a language he almost understood. Why else would I do it? She asked. Because you care, even when you pretend you don't. Caring is inefficient. Is it? Or is it the thing that makes you better at this than anyone else? He leaned forward. You could have stayed bitter after what Marcus did to you, could have become hard and cynical and treated everyone like potential enemies. Instead, you help people. You rebuild failing estates and save tenant families from eviction and create systems that actually work. Why? Because I know what it's like to be powerless, Adeline thought. Because I remember standing at that altar and feeling like I was drowning while everyone watched. Because if I can keep someone else from feeling that way, maybe the whole thing wasn't for nothing. But she didn't say any of that. Instead, we should get back to work. Rowan didn't push. He never did. Just nodded and returned his attention to the maps, letting her retreat back behind her walls. The problem was, the walls were getting thinner. By the second month, other clients started trickling in. Small estates mostly, properties whose owners had heard through the grapevine that Crow Estate Management actually delivered results. Adeline hired 2 more clerks and rented a larger office space. The business was surviving, almost thriving. She should have been happy. Instead, she felt like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. It dropped on a cold February evening. Adeline was working late, reviewing contracts by lamplight, when her clerk knocked on the door. Miss Crow, there's someone here to see you. Tell them to make an appointment. He says it's urgent. A Lord Pemberton? Adeline's stomach dropped. Lord Pemberton, one of Marcus's closest friends, a man who'd been at that disastrous wedding, who'd watched her humiliation with barely concealed amusement. Send him in, she said, steeling herself. Pemberton entered looking exactly as she remembered. Florid face, expensive clothes, the kind of smug expression that came from never facing consequences. He surveyed her office with obvious disdain. So this is where you've ended up, he said, playing at business. Lord Pemberton, what can I do for you? I'm here with a warning. He sat without being invited. There's been talk about you and the Duke. I manage some of his properties. It's hardly scandalous. It's not the professional relationship that concerns people. It's the rest of it. Adeline set down her pen carefully. There is no rest of it. That's not what I'm hearing. Weekly meetings, private conversations, him defending your reputation in clubs. Pemberton leaned back. People are starting to wonder if history is repeating itself, if you're using the same tricks that almost trapped poor Marcus. The rage was instant and white-hot. Get out. I'm trying to help you. The Duke is a good man, but he's naive about women like you. Ambitious, grasping, using their circumstances to... I said get out. Adeline stood. Now, before I have you thrown out. Pemberton rose slowly, his expression hardening. You can't escape what you are, Miss Crow. Society has a long memory. The Duke will realize eventually that you're not worth the scandal. They always do. He left. Adeline sank back into her chair, her hands shaking. The worst part was, he was right. Not about her motives. Those were pure spite and survival, nothing more calculated than that. But about society's memory. About how the scandal would touch Rowan if he kept associating with her. About how eventually he'd realize that she wasn't worth the trouble, just like Marcus had. She tried to bury herself in work, but the words kept echoing. History is repeating itself. You're not worth the scandal. They always realize. When Rowan arrived the next morning for their scheduled meeting, Adeline was ready. We need to end this, she said without preamble. He stopped in the doorway. And what? Your contract. Our arrangement. All of it. Why? Because I'm bad for your reputation. People are talking, and they're going to keep talking until you're as tainted as I am. Rowan closed the door and stepped fully into the office. I don't care what people say. You should. You're a duke. You have responsibilities, a position to maintain. I have a life to live. One I'd prefer to spend with people I actually respect rather than performing for people whose opinions I don't value. This isn't a joke, Rowan. Pemberton came here last night, warned me off you, said I was using the same tricks I used on Marcus. Something dangerous flashed in Rowan's eyes. Pemberton said that? He's not wrong. About perception, I mean. Whether I'm actually doing anything or not doesn't matter. People see what they want to see, and they want to see me as the grasping woman who seduces men above her station. Then people are idiots. People control your world, our world, and I won't be the reason you lose standing in it. Rowan moved closer, his expression intense. Listen to me very carefully. I don't give a damn about standing. I care about building something that matters, working with people who challenge me, living a life that's actually worth living. You think Pemberton's opinion matters more than that? I think you'll regret this eventually. You'll realize I'm not worth the trouble, and I'll what? Leave you at an altar? His voice was sharp now. Is that what this is about? You're so convinced I'm going to betray you that you're trying to make it happen faster? I'm trying to protect us both. You're trying to run. Again. Rowan stopped inches away from her. I'm not Marcus. I'm not going to abandon you because society whispers. I'm not going to decide you're not worth the scandal, but I also can't force you to trust me. That's a choice you have to make. I can't. You can. You're just terrified. His voice softened. And I understand that. I do. But Adeline, at some point you have to decide if you're going to spend the rest of your life running from what happened or if you're going to actually live. The words hit like a physical blow. Adeline felt tears burning behind her eyes, the first she'd allowed herself in years. What if I can't? She whispered. What if I'm too broken? You're not broken. You're careful. There's a difference. Rowan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he took her hands. I'm not asking you to jump off a cliff. I'm asking you to take one step, then another, until maybe, eventually, you realize you're not falling. You're standing on solid ground. Adeline looked down at their joined hands. His were warm, steady. Hers were shaking. I don't know how to do this, she said. Neither do I. We'll figure it out together. She pulled her hands away, wrapping her arms around herself. You should go. Adeline, please, I need time to think. Rowan looked like he wanted to argue. Instead, he nodded. All right, but I'm not giving up on you, even if you give up on yourself. After he left, Adeline locked her office door and sat in the silence. The papers on her desk blurred as tears finally broke through. She cried for the girl at the altar, for the woman who'd built walls so high she couldn't see over them anymore, for the terrifying possibility that maybe Rowan was right. Maybe she'd been so busy protecting herself from pain that she'd locked herself in a different kind of prison. The decision should have been simple. Walk away, stay safe, keep building her business alone. That was the logical choice, the smart choice, the choice that had kept her alive for 4 years. But logic hadn't kept her warm at night. Safety hadn't made her happy. And smart was starting to feel an awful lot like cowardice. 3 days later, Rowan sent a letter. Not a long one, just a single line. I'll wait as long as it takes. Adeline read it 12 times, then tucked it into her desk drawer next to that old folded paper with her promises. She spent the next week in a fog, going through the motions of work while her mind churned. Every time she convinced herself to walk away, she'd remember the way Rowan had looked at her. Not with pity or desire, but with genuine respect, like she was a person worth knowing, not a scandal to be managed or a prize to be won. It was terrifying how much she wanted that to be real. The final push came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Hewitt, the dairy woman from Thornfield, appeared at Adeline's office on a rainy Thursday afternoon. She was older now, grayer, but her eyes were still sharp. Heard you started your own firm, she said, settling into a chair without invitation. Good for you. Mrs. Hewitt, what are you doing in the city? Visiting my son. Thought I'd stop by. She looked around the office approvingly. You've done well for yourself. I'm surviving. Surviving, Mrs. Hewitt snorted. Girl, you're thriving. Half the estates in 3 counties are running better because of you. Don't minimize that. Adeline smiled despite herself. What do you really want? To tell you you're being an idiot. I'm sorry? The Duke. Everyone knows he's courting you. Everyone also knows you're running scared. Mrs. Hewitt leaned forward. I remember when you first came to Thornfield. Remember what you told me when I asked why you worked so hard? You said, because I'll never be powerless again. Those exact words. She paused. But Adeline, fear is its own kind of powerless. You're letting what that bastard Marcus did control you just as much as if you'd married him. The words landed like a punch. It's not that simple. It never is. But here's the truth. You can spend your life being safe, or you can spend it being alive. You can't do both. Mrs. Hewitt stood. That Duke looks at you like you hung the moon. Maybe he's lying, maybe he'll break your heart. But maybe, just maybe, he won't. And you'll never know if you keep running. She left before Adeline could respond. That night, Adeline pulled out both pieces of paper, her old promises and Rowan's letter. She stared at them for a long time, these two versions of her life laid out in ink and paper. I'll never be powerless again. I'll wait as long as it takes. Mrs. Hewitt was right. Fear was its own prison. Adeline had spent 4 years building walls, proving herself, staying safe. And yes, she'd survived. But survival wasn't the same as living. The question was whether she was brave enough to try. The decision crystallized at 3 a.m. Adeline sat up in bed, heart pounding, finally understanding what had been holding her back. It wasn't fear of Rowan leaving. It was fear of wanting him to stay. Because wanting meant vulnerability. Wanting meant giving someone else the power to hurt her. Wanting meant risking everything she'd built on the possibility that this time, this one time, it might actually work. And that was absolutely terrifying. But she realized with sudden clarity, it was also the only way forward that didn't mean dying slowly inside her own walls. Adeline got dressed before she could change her mind, rode through the pre-dawn darkness to Rowan's estate, rehearsing and discarding a dozen different speeches. By the time she arrived, the sky was just starting to lighten, and she had no idea what she was going to say. She knocked on the door. A sleepy servant answered, looking startled. I need to see the Duke, Adeline said. It's urgent. 10 minutes later, Rowan appeared in the doorway of his study, hastily dressed, hair disheveled, concern written across his face. What's wrong? Are you all right? I need to tell you something, Adeline said. The words came fast, desperate. I'm terrified. Of you. Of this. Of everything that wanting you means. I'm terrified that you'll leave, that you'll realize I'm not worth it, that history will repeat itself and I'll end up broken all over again. I'm terrified that I'll trust you and you'll destroy me. Rowan started to speak, but she held up a hand. But I'm more terrified of spending the rest of my life locked in walls I built to protect myself from pain. I'm more terrified of being safe and alone and dying without ever having actually lived. She took a shaking breath. So I'm choosing to be terrified with you, instead of safe without you. And if that's the stupidest decision I've ever made, then at least I made it instead of letting fear make it for me. The silence stretched out. Rowan stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then he crossed the room in 3 long strides and kissed her. It wasn't gentle or practiced. It was desperate and real, and tasted like 4 years of walls crashing down all at once. Adeline kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, letting herself feel everything she'd been locking away, want and fear and hope and terror, all tangled together until she couldn't tell them apart. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rowan pressed his forehead against hers. I need you to understand something, he said quietly. I'm going to ask you to marry me. Adeline went rigid. Rowan, not now, when you're ready. Could be a month, could be a year, could be 10 years. I don't care. But eventually, I'm going to ask. And I need you to know that before we go any further. What if I'm never ready? Then we'll figure something else out. But Adeline, he pulled back to look at her. I love you. Not the idea of you, not the challenge. You. The woman who argues about crop rotations and runs estates better than men twice her age and is absolutely terrified of being vulnerable. I love all of it, and I'm not going anywhere. The tears came then, hot and unstoppable. I don't know if I can give you what you want. I want you, however that looks, whatever that means. He wiped the tears from her face with gentle thumbs. We'll figure out the rest as we go. Adeline wanted to believe him, desperately, painfully wanted to believe that this could work, that she could have this without it destroying her. But 4 years of walls didn't come down in a single conversation. Over the next months, they tried. Adeline let Rowan into her life in careful increments, dinners together, walks through his estate, conversations that stretched late into the night. She was awkward at intimacy, kept pulling back when things got too close, reflexively putting up barriers whenever she felt too vulnerable. Rowan was patient, infuriatingly, impossibly patient. Never pushed, never demanded, just kept showing up and proving that he meant what he said. But society didn't make it easy. The gossip grew vicious. Whispers about the abandoned bride seducing the Duke, about her using him for his money and status, about how tragic it would be when he realized what she really was. The dinner invitations started coming, not for Adeline, but for Rowan alone. Pointed exclusions meant to remind him where he belonged and where she didn't. Ignore them, Rowan said when she brought it up. I can't. Neither can you. They're your world. They're a world, not mine. He took her hand. The only opinion that matters is yours. Do you want this? Us? Yes, but no buts. Either you trust me or you don't. That was the crux of it, wasn't it? Trust. The one thing Adeline had sworn never to give again. She tried to believe that Rowan was different, that this time wouldn't end in abandonment and ruin. But every time she started to relax, some new reminder would surface. A cutting remark at a social function, a letter from her mother begging her not to embarrass the family again, Pemberton's smug face across a crowded room. The breaking point came in April. Rowan proposed. They were in his garden, the same place where months ago Adeline had run from him. He'd planned something elaborate. Adeline could see the evidence in the carefully arranged flowers, the nervous energy in his movements, but in the end, he just said it plainly. Marry me. Adeline's world stopped. She looked at him. This man who'd been nothing but patient and kind, who'd proven over and over that he wasn't Marcus, who loved her with an intensity that should have been comforting. Instead, she felt like she was drowning. I can't, she whispered. Why not? Because... The words stuck in her throat. Because I'm terrified. Because I can still feel what it was like standing at that altar. Because what if you change your mind? What if this is a mistake? What if I trust you and you destroy me? I need time, she said instead. How much time? I don't know. Rowan's expression shifted, not angry, but something close to broken. I've given you time, months of it. I've been patient, I've proved myself over and over, I've done everything except literally write it in the sky that I love you and I'm not leaving. What more do you need? I don't know. The words came out as a shout. I don't know what I need. I just know that when you asked me that question, all I could feel was that altar and those eyes and... She stopped. Rowan was staring at her. You're still there, he said quietly. 4 years later, and you're still standing at that altar. That's not fair. It's true. He stepped back. I can't compete with a ghost, Adeline. I can't keep proving I'm not Marcus when you won't let go of what he did. I'm trying. Are you? Or are you just going through the motions while keeping one foot out the door in case you need to run? His voice cracked. I love you, but I can't make you trust me. That's something you have to choose, and right now it feels like you're choosing fear instead. Adeline felt something shatter in her chest. So what are you saying? I'm saying I need to know if you're ever going to be able to do this. Not a maybe, not a someday, a yes or a no. Rowan's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Because I'll wait forever if there's actual hope, but I can't keep pouring myself into someone who's already decided I'm going to hurt them. The ultimatum hung between them like a blade. Adeline opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. But the words wouldn't come, because the truth was she didn't know. Didn't know if she'd ever be brave enough to say yes, to stand at another altar and trust that this time would be different, and her silence was answer enough. Rowan nodded slowly, like she'd confirmed something he'd suspected. "I love you," he said, "but I can't do this anymore. Not like this." He turned and walked away. Adeline stood frozen in the garden, watching him disappear into the house. She should have run after him, should have said something, anything, to fix this. Instead, she did what she'd always done. She ran. Adeline made it 3 blocks before she had to stop, leaning against a stone wall as her breath came in ragged gasps. Not from exertion, from the realization of what she'd just done. She'd let him walk away. Let the best thing in her life disappear because she was too much of a coward to say yes. The street was empty except for a stray cat picking through garbage. Adeline slid down the wall until she was sitting on the cold cobblestones, her expensive dress pooling around her like a collapsed parachute. She should go back, should run to Rowan's estate and tell him she was sorry, that she'd made a mistake, that she wanted to try. But the words from 4 years ago echoed in her skull. "I'll never be powerless again." Except she was powerless. Powerless against her own fear, her own memories, her own inability to move past a single day that had defined her entire life. She'd spent 4 years building walls to keep herself safe, and all she'd managed to do was build a prettier prison. The cat looked at her with disdainful yellow eyes, then disappeared into an alley. Adeline sat there until the cold seeped through her dress and into her bones. Then she stood up and walked back to her office, because work was the only thing that had never betrayed her. The next 2 weeks were a study in numbness. Adeline threw herself into her business with mechanical efficiency, taking on new clients, expanding operations, making decisions that would have excited her a month ago, but now felt hollow. Her staff noticed, of course they noticed, but no one said anything. She was the boss. What she did with her personal life was her own concern, except it wasn't just personal anymore. Word had spread that the Duke had ended things. The gossip shifted from malicious to pitying, which was somehow worse. Poor Adeline Crow, abandoned again. Some women just weren't meant to be loved. On the 15th day, Mr. Ashford showed up at her office unannounced. "You look terrible," he said without preamble. "Thank you. Is there something I can help you with?" "Yes, you can stop wallowing and fix this." Adeline set down her pen. "There's nothing to fix. It's over." "Because you're an idiot." Mr. Ashford sat down heavily. "I've known Rowan Hale for 20 years. That man doesn't give up on anything easily. If he walked away, it's because you pushed him so hard he had no choice. He gave me an ultimatum. He gave you clarity. There's a difference." Mr. Ashford leaned forward. "Let me ask you something. What are you afraid of? Really afraid of, not the surface-level nonsense. Being left again, being humiliated again, standing at an altar and No." He cut her off. "That's what happened. I'm asking what you're afraid of." Adeline stared at him. "I don't understand." "You've spent 4 years proving you don't need anyone. You built a business, made a name for yourself, became successful on your own terms. So the question is, what does marriage take away from you that scares you more than losing Rowan?" The answer came before she could stop it. "Everything. It takes everything, because if I marry him and he leaves, I'll have nothing. I'll be the woman abandoned twice, and this time it'll be worse because everyone will say I should have known better." "Ah." Mr. Ashford sat back. "There it is." "There what is?" "You think love is a trade. You give everything, and if the other person leaves, you lose everything." He shook his head. "But that's not how it works. You don't lose who you are when you marry someone. You don't stop being brilliant or capable or strong. You just stop being alone." "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly. My wife died 3 years ago, cancer. I watched her fade away for months, and when she finally went, I thought I'd die too. Thought the pain would kill me." His voice roughened. "But you know what? I'm still here, still running my business, still living my life. I didn't lose myself when I married her, and I didn't lose myself when she died. The love we had didn't diminish me. It made me more." Adeline felt tears burning. "What if he changes his mind? What if you get hit by a carriage tomorrow? What if your business fails? What if the sun doesn't rise?" Mr. Ashford stood. "You can't live your life preparing for the worst thing that might happen. Eventually, you have to decide that the possibility of happiness is worth the risk of pain. After he left, Adeline pulled out those two pieces of paper again, her promises and Rowan's letter. She'd read them so many times the creases were wearing thin. I'll never be powerless again. But she was powerless. Had been for 4 years. Powerless against her fear, her past, her inability to move forward. She'd thought strength meant never being vulnerable, never needing anyone, building walls so high nothing could hurt her. She'd been wrong. Real strength wasn't avoiding pain. It was surviving it and choosing to risk it again anyway. Adeline picked up her pen and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, started writing before she could talk herself out of it. The letter took 3 drafts. The first was too apologetic, the second too defensive. The third was just honest. Rowan, you were right. I've been standing at that altar for 4 years, and I've let what Marcus did define every choice I've made since. I've been so afraid of being powerless that I made fear my master instead. That ends now. I can't promise I won't be scared. I can't promise I'll always be brave enough to trust you the way you deserve, but I can promise to try. To choose you over my fear, over and over, until maybe someday the choice becomes easy. If you're willing to give me another chance, I'm ready to stop running. Adeline. She sealed the letter and sent it before she could change her mind. Then she waited. 1 day passed, then 2, then 5, then no response. Adeline forced herself to keep working, but the waiting was agony. What if he'd moved on? What if he'd decided she wasn't worth the trouble after all? What if she'd finally found her courage only to discover she was too late? On day 7, Mrs. Hewitt appeared at her office again. "You sent him a letter," she said without preamble. "How did you—" "His head steward is my cousin. Word travels." Mrs. Hewitt settled into a chair. He read it. Adeline's heart stuttered. And he's not sure whether to believe you. Can't say I blame him. You've run from him more times than I can count. So what do I do? Stop writing letters and actually show up. Mrs. Hewitt fixed her with a sharp look. Words are easy. Actions are what matter. If you want him to believe you've changed, prove it. How? That's for you to figure out. But I'll give you a hint. Running away showed him you didn't trust him. So maybe showing up, really showing up in a way that scares you, might prove the opposite. After Mrs. Hewitt left, Adeline sat with those words. Showing up. Being vulnerable in a way that couldn't be taken back or explained away. The idea came to her slowly, terrifyingly. The one thing she'd sworn she'd never do again. The place she'd vowed never to return to. The symbol of her greatest humiliation. The chapel. Her hand started shaking just thinking about it. But Mrs. Hewitt was right. Words were easy. If Adeline wanted to prove she'd changed, she needed to face the thing that had broken her in the first place. She needed to go back to that altar. The next morning, Adeline sent letters to everyone who mattered. Her parents, who hadn't spoken to her in 4 years. The society matrons who'd watched her shame. Lord Pemberton and his circle of gossips. Even Margaret, her former best friend who'd crossed the street to avoid her. And Rowan. The message was simple. I would be honored by your presence at the Chapel of St. Catherine on the 23rd of May at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. No explanation, no context, just the invitation and the location. The same chapel where she'd been abandoned 4 years ago. Responses started arriving within days. Most were confused, some were cruel, a few were cautiously curious. Her mother sent a curt note asking if Adeline had lost her mind. Pemberton's response dripped with mockery about history repeating itself. Rowan didn't respond at all. Adeline pushed down the panic and kept planning. She hired the same florist who'd done her first wedding, ordered the same flowers. Contacted the same officiant, who sounded deeply uncomfortable but agreed when she offered to pay triple his usual fee. Sent notice to the papers that Adeline Crowe would be making a public statement at the chapel on the 23rd. Her staff thought she'd cracked. Miss Crowe, her head clerk ventured carefully, "Are you sure this is wise? Going back there seems insane?" Adeline supplied. "Probably, but wisdom hasn't gotten me very far." The days leading up to the 23rd were torture. Adeline veered between certainty and terror, between feeling like a genius and feeling like she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. What if Rowan didn't come? What if everyone came just to watch her fail again? What if this grand gesture just proved she was as pathetic as they all thought? But she didn't back down. Couldn't back down. Because for the first time in 4 years, she was choosing courage over safety, and she'd rather fail spectacularly than spend one more day hiding. The morning of the 23rd, Adeline dressed carefully. Not in a wedding dress. She wasn't that dramatic. Just a simple blue dress, well made but understated. She pinned her hair up herself, no maid to fuss over the details. Applied minimal cosmetics because her hands were shaking too badly for anything elaborate. In the mirror, she looked terrified. Good. She should be terrified. This was terrifying. The carriage ride to the chapel felt both endless and too short. When the building came into view, those Gothic spires that stained glass, Adeline's breath caught. 4 years hadn't changed it. Still too grand, still too public, still the site of her greatest shame. She stepped down from the carriage and stood for a moment just looking at it. "You can do this," she whispered to herself. "You've done harder things." That was a lie. She hadn't done anything harder than this. The chapel was filling up. Adeline could see them through the windows. Society's elite, drawn by curiosity or cruelty or that particular hunger for spectacle that made people slow down to look at accidents. She recognized faces from 4 years ago, people who'd watched her first humiliation and had apparently returned for the sequel. The officiant met her at the door looking nervous. "Miss Crow, I'm not entirely sure what we're doing here." "Neither am I," Adeline admitted, "but we're doing it anyway." She walked inside. The chapel was packed, more people than she'd expected, filling the pews with rustling fabric and barely concealed whispers. Every head turned as she entered. The murmurs started immediately. "Is she getting married again? Who would marry her after last time? This is insane. She's making a spectacle of herself." Adeline kept walking. Down that same aisle she'd walked 4 years ago, past those same faces, toward that same altar. Her heart was hammering so hard she thought it might break her ribs. But she didn't stop. She reached the front and turned to face the crowd. The whispers died into expectant silence. 300 pairs of eyes stared at her, waiting for her to speak, to explain, to either triumph or fail spectacularly. Adeline took a breath. 4 years ago, I stood at this altar and waited for a man who never came. You all remember that. How could you forget? It was the scandal of the season. Someone in the back laughed, sharp, cruel. Adeline ignored it. I spent 4 years running from that day, convinced myself that being strong meant never being vulnerable again, that success meant never needing anyone, that the only way to protect myself was to build walls so high nothing could reach me. She paused. I was wrong. Her eyes scanned the crowd, looking for one face. She couldn't find him. Rowan hadn't come. The panic threatened to choke her. She pushed through it. Being abandoned at an altar taught me what powerlessness feels like. So I spent 4 years making sure I'd never feel that way again. I built a business, proved I could survive on my own, showed everyone that I didn't need the man who left me or anyone else. Her voice strengthened. And I did survive. I thrived. But somewhere along the way, surviving became its own kind of prison. Get to the point, someone called out, Pemberton, from the sound of it. The point, Adeline said clearly, is that I'm done letting that day define me. I'm done letting Marcus Wellborn's cowardice control my choices. I'm done being afraid of what might happen if I let myself trust someone again. She turned to face the altar, that spot where she'd stood 4 years ago, flowers wilting in her hands as the minutes ticked by and her future collapsed. This chapel was supposed to be the place where my life began, she said quietly. Instead, it became the place where I learned that people could be cruel, that promises meant nothing, that love was just another way to get hurt. Adeline turned back to the crowd. But that's not what love is. Real love isn't about pretty ceremonies or perfect moments. It's about choosing someone even when it's terrifying. It's about being vulnerable enough to trust that they won't destroy you with that vulnerability. It's about taking the risk even though you know it might break you, because the alternative, being safe and alone, is its own kind of death. Movement near the back of the chapel caught her eye. The door was opening. Someone was slipping in late, trying to be inconspicuous. Rowan. He stood against the back wall, dressed simply, his expression carefully neutral. But he'd come. He was here. Adeline felt something unlock in her chest. There's a man in this room who asked me to marry him, she continued, her eyes finding Rowan's across the crowded space. A good man. The kind of man who sees past scandal to the person underneath, who respects what I've built instead of being threatened by it, who's been nothing but patient while I figured out how to stop being afraid. The chapel was dead silent now. Everyone was leaning forward, following her gaze to where Rowan stood. I told him no, not because I didn't love him, but because I was terrified. Terrified of ending up back here, back at this altar, waiting for someone who wouldn't come. Terrified of giving someone the power to hurt me again. Adeline's voice broke slightly. But I realized something. The only person who's been hurting me for the past 4 years is me. By refusing to move forward, by letting one day define my entire life, by choosing fear over everything else. I've been my own worst enemy. She stepped down from the altar and started walking up the aisle, toward the back of the chapel, toward Rowan. The whispers erupted again, but Adeline didn't care. She kept walking until she stood directly in front of him. "I'm sorry," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm sorry I ran. I'm sorry I made you prove yourself over and over when the problem was never whether you were trustworthy. It was whether I was brave enough to trust. I'm sorry I let fear win when I should have let you in." Rowan's expression shifted, something vulnerable breaking through his careful control. "Adeline, I'm not done." She took a shaking breath. "You said you loved me, all of me, including the scared parts. I didn't believe you because I didn't think I was worth loving like that. But I'm choosing to believe you now. I'm choosing to trust that when you said you weren't leaving, you meant it. I'm choosing you over my fear, over my past, over every instinct that tells me to run." The tears were falling now, but she didn't wipe them away. "So if the offer still stands, if you still want someone who's going to be scared and difficult and probably run at least 3 more times before I figure out how to stand still, then yes." My answer is yes. The silence in the chapel was absolute. Everyone was staring at her, at Rowan, at this unexpected drama unfolding in the place where 4 years ago she'd been humiliated. Rowan didn't move for what felt like forever. Then slowly a smile broke across his face, genuine, surprised, a little bit disbelieving. "Here?" he asked. "You're saying yes here?" "I'm taking back this place, taking back that day, turning the worst moment of my life into something different." Adeline managed a watery smile. "Plus, everyone's already here," seemed efficient. He laughed, a real full laugh that echoed through the chapel. Then he closed the distance between them and kissed her in front of everyone, in the same building where 4 years ago she'd been left alone and ashamed. The whispers exploded into full conversation, but Adeline didn't hear any of it. She was too busy kissing him back, her hands fisted in his jacket, letting herself feel everything she'd been holding back for months. Love and terror and relief and joy all tangled together until she couldn't separate them. When they finally broke apart, Rowan pressed his forehead against hers. "You're insane," he said quietly. "Completely insane." "I know. This is the most dramatic thing I've ever witnessed. I'm aware. I love you so much it's actually painful." Adeline laughed through her tears. "That's probably not healthy. Nothing about this is healthy. But I'll take it." He pulled back to look at her. "Are you sure? Because if you run again, I'm not sure my heart can take it." "I'm sure." Terrified, but sure. She glanced around at the staring crowd. "Although I'm realizing I just proposed to you in front of 300 people without actually checking if you still wanted to marry me. I want to marry you. Even though I'm a disaster? Especially because you're a disaster. A brilliant, infuriating, spectacular disaster." Rowan kissed her again, softer this time. "When? When what? When do you want to get married?" Adeline looked around the chapel, at the flowers already in place, at the officiant standing awkwardly near the altar, at the crowd that had come expecting a show and gotten something entirely different. "Now," she said impulsively. "Right now. Let's actually do this before I lose my nerve." Rowan blinked. "You want to get married right now?" "Why not? Everyone's here. The flowers are here. The officiant is here." She grabbed his hand. 4 years ago, I stood at that altar and waited for someone who never came. Today, I'm walking up there with someone who's already proved he shows up. Let's give them a real show." "Adeline, unless you don't want to, we can wait. We can plan something proper. We can... Yes, Rowan interrupted. Yes, let's do it. Let's get married right now in front of everyone who watched you get humiliated 4 years ago. Let's make this the most spectacular comeback in the history of scandals. They walked to the front of the chapel hand in hand. The crowd was in chaos, people standing up to get a better view, voices raised in shock and excitement, the gossip already spreading like wildfire. The officiant looked like he might pass out. This is highly irregular. I'm paying you triple, remember? Adeline reminded him. Be irregular. He sighed but opened his book. Does anyone have the rings? Rowan pulled a ring from his pocket. Simple gold, elegant. I've been carrying this for 3 months, he admitted. Just in case. Adeline laughed, half hysterical. Of course you have. Do you have one for him? The officiant asked. No, Adeline looked around desperately. Her eyes landed on her mother, sitting in the third row looking absolutely scandalized. Mother, I need a ring. You can't be serious about this. I'm extremely serious. Ring, now. Her mother stared at her for a long moment. Then, incredibly, she pulled off her own wedding band and handed it over without a word. Adeline took it, surprised to find her hands were steady now. The ceremony was quick, abbreviated, chaotic, nothing like the elaborate production from 4 years ago. No long speeches, no carefully rehearsed vows, just the basics delivered by an officiant who clearly couldn't believe this was happening. Do you, Rowan Hale, take this woman? I do, Rowan interrupted. Yes, absolutely. Can we skip to the part where I kiss her? That's not how this... I do too, Adeline added. Whatever he just agreed to, same. I'm in. The officiant gave up. Fine. You're married. Try to make better decisions than this in the future. Rowan kissed her before the words were fully out. The crowd erupted, some in applause, some in scandalized gasps, most in pure shock. Adeline kissed him back and didn't care about any of it. She'd just married a duke in a borrowed ring wearing a day dress in front of everyone who'd watched her greatest humiliation. It was perfect. When they finally broke apart, Rowan grinned at her. Well, that happened. That definitely happened. Adeline looked out at the crowd. I think we just gave them enough gossip for the next decade. Worth it. He tucked her hand into his arm. Ready to face them? No, but I'm doing it anyway. They walked back down the aisle together, past rows of stunned faces. Some people were smiling, some were clearly appalled, most were just confused. Adeline met each gaze steadily, no longer the girl who'd run from this chapel in shame. Near the back, she saw Pemberton. He looked like he'd swallowed something sour. Adeline couldn't resist. She smiled at him, bright and vicious. Looks like history didn't repeat itself after all, she said as they passed. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright and warm. Adeline squinted against it, feeling lighter than she had in years. No more walls, no more running, just her and Rowan and the terrifying freedom of having actually done it. So, Rowan said, we're married. Apparently. To be clear, this wasn't how I imagined this going. Better or worse? He considered. Different. Definitely more dramatic. Very you. He pulled her close. I love it. A carriage pulled up, Rowan's by the look of it. The driver was trying very hard to appear like impromptu weddings happened every day. Where to? Rowan asked. Anywhere. Everywhere. I don't care. Adeline laughed, giddy with relief and residual adrenaline. I just married you in front of everyone who said I was unmarriageable. I think I've used up all my decision-making capacity for the day. They climbed into the carriage. Through the window, Adeline could see people streaming out of the chapel, already clustering into groups to discuss what they'd just witnessed. The story would be everywhere by nightfall. The abandoned bride who crashed her own memorial service and turned it into a wedding. Let them talk. For once, Adeline didn't care. Do you regret it? Rowan asked quietly. Doing it this way? Ask me in an hour when the panic sets in. Adeline laced her fingers through his. But right now, no regrets. Good. Because we just got married in the least conventional way possible, and I don't think we can undo it. Why would we want to undo it? Excellent point. He kissed her hand. Duchess Hale. The title sent a jolt through her. That's going to take some getting used to. We have time. The carriage rolled through the city streets, carrying them away from the chapel and its ghosts, from the woman Adeline had been, and toward whatever came next. She leaned against Rowan's shoulder and watched the buildings pass, feeling the solid warmth of him beside her. 4 years ago, she'd walked out of that chapel alone and broken, convinced she'd never trust anyone again. Today, she'd walked out married to a man who'd proved over and over that he was worth the risk. The fear was still there, probably always would be, but it didn't control her anymore. She'd chosen love over safety, vulnerability over walls, and if that made her reckless or foolish or insane, then so be it. At least she was finally free. The panic set in approximately 45 minutes later. They were in Rowan's study, their study now, Adeline supposed, though that would take some adjusting to, when the reality of what she'd just done crashed over her like a wave. "I got married in a day dress," she said, staring at nothing. "Without telling anyone, without planning anything. I stood up in front of 300 people and proposed to you, and then we got married in borrowed rings, and—" "Breathe," Rowan said, guiding her to a chair. "You're going pale." "I think I'm having some kind of delayed shock reaction." "That's fair." It was fairly shocking. He poured her a glass of brandy. "Drink this." Adeline drank. The burn helped center her. What did we just do? Got married, spectacularly, in a way that will be talked about for decades. Rowan sat across from her, his expression amused. Having second thoughts? No, maybe. I don't know. She took another drink. Ask me again when my heart stops trying to beat out of my chest. Take your time. We have the rest of our lives. That should have been comforting. Instead, it triggered another wave of panic. The rest of our lives. That's a very long time. What if... Stop. Rowan's voice was gentle but firm. You're spiraling. I can see it happening. I'm not spiraling. I'm just processing. You're catastrophizing. There's a difference. He took her free hand. Tell me what you're actually afraid of right now. Adeline forced herself to focus. That I made this huge dramatic gesture and tomorrow I'll wake up terrified again. That this feeling, this certainty, won't last. That I'll go back to being the woman who runs instead of the woman who showed up. And if that happens, then I'll have dragged you into my mess for nothing. Adeline, Rowan waited until she met his eyes. You're going to be scared sometimes. That's fine. I'm going to be scared sometimes too. Marriage doesn't magically fix fear or doubt or whatever other garbage our brains throw at us. It just means we deal with it together instead of alone. That's not very romantic. No, but it's true, and I'd rather have truth than romance. He squeezed her hand. You showed up today. You faced the thing that terrified you most and you did it anyway. That's not nothing. That's everything. The brandy was helping, or maybe it was Rowan's voice, steady and sure. Adeline felt her breathing start to even out. I'm going to be terrible at this, she said. Probably. I'm going to be terrible at parts of it too. We'll figure it out as we go. A knock on the door interrupted them. Rowan's butler entered, looking apologetic. Your Grace, there are visitors. Quite a lot of them, actually. They're gathering outside. Rowan frowned. Who? Everyone, sir. From the chapel. They followed the carriage. Adeline's stomach dropped. They followed us. Apparently so. And there are reporters. Quite a few reporters, actually. They're asking for a statement. Of course there were reporters. Adeline had just created the scandal of the decade, possibly the century. The woman abandoned at the altar marrying a duke in an impromptu ceremony at the site of her original humiliation. That was front-page material for every gossip sheet in the country. Tell them we're not available, Rowan said. I tried, sir. They're not leaving. In fact, more keep arriving. Adeline stood, straightening her dress. Then I'll talk to them. You don't have to. Yes, I do. I started this. I might as well finish it properly. She looked at Rowan. Unless you'd rather I didn't. I'd rather you did whatever makes you comfortable. This is your story. Our story, Adeline corrected, and I'm tired of other people controlling the narrative. The crowd outside was larger than she'd expected. At least 100 people milling around the estate gates, reporters shouting questions, society matrons clutching their pearls, curiosity seekers hoping for another show. Adeline stepped out onto the front steps and the noise level tripled. Miss Crow. Is it true you proposed? What possessed you to— Duchess Hale, a statement, please. Adeline held up a hand. Slowly, the crowd quieted. I'll make this brief, she said, her voice carrying across the courtyard. Yes, I proposed to Duke Hale. Yes, we got married approximately an hour ago. No, it wasn't planned. Yes, I'm aware this is unconventional. Why did you do it? Someone shouted, a reporter by the look of him. Because I was tired of being afraid. Because I spent 4 years letting one terrible day control my entire life, and I decided to take that day back. Adeline met the reporter's eyes. 4 years ago, Marcus Wellborn left me at that altar. He humiliated me in front of everyone who mattered. I could have let that define me forever, and for a long time I did. But today, I chose differently. I chose to return to that chapel not as a victim, but as someone who refuses to be broken by her past. So this was revenge? Another reporter called out. No, this was freedom. Adeline felt Rowan step up beside her, his presence solid and grounding. Marcus took something from me 4 years ago. My trust, my ability to believe in love, my faith that people meant what they said. I've been trying to get that back ever since. Today, I finally did. What about your business? Someone else asked. Will you continue managing estates? Absolutely. Being married doesn't make me less capable of my work. If anything, it makes me more so. She glanced at Rowan, who nodded encouragingly. I'm expanding the firm, actually. Taking on larger properties, training other women in estate management. There's no reason half the population should be excluded from this work just because of their gender. That caused a stir. Adeline could see the reporters scribbling frantically. You plan to train women? The question came from Lord Pemberton, who'd pushed his way to the front of the crowd. His face was red with either exertion or outrage. That's absurd. Estate management requires intelligence, dedication, and an understanding of land and people, Adeline interrupted. All things women are perfectly capable of. I've been doing this work for 4 years, Lord Pemberton, successfully. The only thing absurd is the idea that I'm somehow an exception. The Duke can't possibly approve of his wife working like a common— I not only approve, I encourage it, Rowan cut in. His voice was calm but carried an edge that made Pemberton shut his mouth. My wife is brilliant at what she does. Why would I want her to stop? But propriety? Propriety is a cage people use to control women they're afraid of, Adeline said flatly. I'm done with cages. I'm done with being told what I can and can't do based on what's proper instead of what's effective. And I'm done pretending to be less capable than I am to make insecure men comfortable. The silence that followed was electric. Adeline could see shock on faces, approval on others, calculation on the reporters who were already mentally composing their headlines. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, someone started clapping. It was Mrs. Hewitt, of course. The old dairy woman had somehow made her way to the estate and was applauding slowly, deliberately. About time someone said it out loud. Others joined in. Not everyone, not even most, but enough. Enough that Adeline felt something warm unfurl in her chest. She wasn't alone. There were people who saw her not as a scandal or a cautionary tale, but as someone who'd refused to accept the limitations society tried to impose. Are there any other questions? Rowan asked, his hand finding Adeline's. A young woman pushed forward, barely 20, dressed in the kind of expensive clothes that screamed old money. How do I learn? She asked. Estate management. How do I learn to do what you do? Adeline blinked, surprised. You want to learn estate management? I want to learn to be useful, to do something that matters instead of just sitting in drawing rooms waiting to be married off. The girl lifted her chin. If you can do it, why can't I? You can, Adeline said. Come by my office next week, we'll discuss it. I want to learn too, another voice called out, then another. Within minutes, half a dozen young women had pushed forward, all asking the same question. How do I learn? How do I do what you did? How do I matter? Adeline felt tears burning but refused to let them fall. All of you. Anyone who wants to learn, come to Crow Estate Management. We'll figure it out together. The reporters were in a frenzy now, shouting questions about this new development. Pemberton looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. Several of the older matrons were having what appeared to be minor apoplexy. Rowan gently guided Adeline back toward the house. I think that's enough for one day. Did that just happen? Adeline asked as the door closed behind them. That definitely just happened. You just started a revolution on our front steps. I didn't mean to. Yes, you did. Rowan pulled her close. You absolutely did. And it was magnificent. The next weeks were chaos. The story spread like wildfire, not just locally, but across the entire country. The abandoned bride who'd become a successful businesswoman, who'd proposed to a duke at the site of her original humiliation, who'd then announced plans to train other women in estate management. It was everything the papers loved: scandal, redemption, and the promise of more drama to come. The reactions were predictably split. Half of society was scandalized, calling Adeline everything from a harlot to a radical to a terrible influence on impressionable young women. The other half was fascinated, treating her like some kind of folk hero who'd bucked convention and succeeded anyway. Adeline tried to ignore both extremes and focus on the work. True to her word, she expanded the firm, hired 3 female apprentices, and started training them in everything from contract negotiation to soil assessment. The first few weeks were rough. The women were capable, but completely untrained, and Adeline had to teach them not just the technical skills, but how to handle the skepticism and outright hostility they'd face from male colleagues. Mr. Henderson told me women don't have the constitution for outdoor work, one of her apprentices reported after her first solo site visit. Sarah, her name was, sharp-eyed and quick to learn, but still learning to stand her ground. What did you tell him? Adeline asked. That I'd just walked 15 miles surveying his property in the rain and I felt fine. So perhaps he should reconsider his definition of constitution. Adeline grinned. Good. What did he say? He looked like he wanted to argue, then checked my survey notes and realized they were accurate. Ended up offering me tea. Even better, they'll respect the work if you make them. Don't give them a choice. The business grew faster than Adeline had anticipated. Turns out there were a lot of landowners who cared more about results than propriety, and word spread that Crow Estate Management delivered. Within 3 months, she'd hired 2 more apprentices and was turning away clients because they couldn't handle the volume. Rowan watched it all with amused pride. He'd been right. Marriage hadn't diminished her. If anything, having a secure foundation at home made her bolder in her work. She took risks she might not have taken alone, knowing that if she failed, she wouldn't end up destitute. You're terrifying, he told her one evening, watching her review contracts by lamplight, in the best possible way. I'm just doing my job. You're revolutionizing an entire industry. There's a difference. He leaned over her shoulder to look at the papers. Is this the Thornfield contract renewal? Yes. They want to extend for another 5 years. That's the property where you started, isn't it? Where Perkins tried to sabotage you. The very same. Turns out they're quite happy with competent management. Adeline signed the contract with a flourish. Who knew? But not everything was smooth. The backlash came in waves, snide comments at social functions, business contacts who suddenly became unavailable, whispered campaigns to discredit her work. Pemberton seemed to have made it his personal mission to undermine her, spreading rumors that she was using Rowan's name to secure contracts, that her success was due to her husband's influence rather than her own skill. Adeline gritted her teeth and kept working. Let them talk. The results spoke for themselves. The breaking point came 6 months after the impromptu wedding. Adeline was reviewing accounts when a letter arrived, sealed with an official-looking crest she didn't recognize. She opened it, expecting another contract offer or rejection. Instead, it was an invitation. The Royal Agricultural Society was hosting its annual conference, and they wanted Adeline to speak about innovative estate management practices. She read it 3 times, certain she'd misunderstood. Rowan? She called out. He appeared in the doorway. What's wrong? The Agricultural Society wants me to speak at their conference. That's wonderful. What's the problem? They've never invited a woman to speak before, ever. It's been an exclusively male organization for over a century. Adeline set down the letter, her hands shaking slightly. This is either a genuine honor or an elaborate setup to humiliate me. Rowan took the letter and read it carefully. It's legitimate. I recognize some of these names. They're serious people. Progressive for their generation. Or they want to make an example of me. Invite the scandalous woman to speak, then tear her arguments apart in front of everyone. Possibly. But what if they don't? What if they're genuinely interested in what you have to say? He handed the letter back. Either way, you should do it. Even if it's a trap. Especially if it's a trap, because then you'll spring it and prove them wrong. Rowan smiled. You've spent 6 months showing people that women can do this work. Now show them why they should care. Adeline accepted the invitation. The conference was held in a grand hall in the capital, attended by every major landowner and estate manager in the country. Adeline arrived early, dressed in her most professional outfit. Nothing flashy, just good fabric and clean lines that said she belonged there. The stares started immediately. She was the only woman in a room of 300 men, and they made sure she knew it. Whispers followed her like smoke, ranging from curious to hostile. She spotted Pemberton near the front, his expression smug. He'd clearly heard about her invitation and was here to watch her fail. Nervous? Rowan asked quietly. He'd insisted on coming, sitting in the audience as moral support. Terrified, Adeline admitted, but I'm doing it anyway. That's my wife. The morning sessions dragged on, presentations about crop rotations and irrigation systems, all delivered by men in expensive suits who'd probably never done a day of manual labor in their lives. Adeline listened carefully, taking notes, watching how the speakers handled questions and challenges. Finally, after lunch, it was her turn. The introduction was brief, almost curt. Miss Crow, excuse me, Duchess Hale, will speak about her experiences in estate management. Adeline walked to the podium. 300 faces stared at her, most skeptical, some openly hostile. She could feel the weight of their judgment, their assumptions, their certainty that she was about to embarrass herself. She set down her notes and looked out at the crowd. 4 years ago, she began, I was unemployable. A woman with a scandal attached to her name, no formal training, and no prospects. Society said I was worthless, good for nothing except perhaps a cautionary tale. So I decided to prove them wrong. She had their attention now. Even the hostile faces were leaning forward slightly. I started managing estates because it was the only work I could find. I was good at it because I had to be. Failure meant poverty, and I'd already experienced enough humiliation for one lifetime. But something interesting happened. The more I worked, the more I realized that most of the rules about estate management were nonsense. Someone in the back laughed, sharp, dismissive. Adeline ignored it. Take tenant relations, for example. The conventional wisdom is to extract maximum rent and treat tenants as disposable. But I found that if you actually invest in your tenants, give them incentives to improve yields, share profits when they exceed expectations, treat them like partners rather than servants, everyone makes more money. Revolutionary, I know. This time, the laughter was different, more genuine, less mocking. Adeline spent the next 30 minutes laying out her methods. Specific examples, hard numbers, case studies from the estate she'd turned around. She talked about the importance of understanding local conditions instead of applying blanket solutions, about listening to the people who actually worked the land, about treating estate management as a collaboration rather than a dictatorship. When she finished, the room was silent. Then someone started clapping. Not Mrs. Hewitt this time. One of the older men in the front row, a respected landowner whose estates spanned 3 counties. Others joined in, the applause building until the whole room was acknowledging her presentation. The questions came fast after that. Some were genuine, people wanting to know more about her techniques. Others were clearly attempts to discredit her, complex scenarios designed to make her look foolish. Adeline handled them all with the same calm competence she brought to her work. When Lord Pemberton stood up, of course he did, and asked how she could possibly manage large estates without the natural authority that men possessed, she smiled sweetly. The same way I manage them without the natural incompetence that seems to plague half the men in this room, she replied. Through skill, hard work, and actually caring about results more than my own ego. The room erupted in startled laughter. Even some of Pemberton's allies were grinning. He sat down, red-faced and furious. After the session ended, Adeline was mobbed. Landowners wanting to hire her, managers asking for advice, even a few of the younger men expressing interest in her training program. It was overwhelming and exhilarating and terrifying all at once. You were brilliant, Rowan said when she finally extracted herself from the crowd. I wasn't terrible, Adeline agreed, though I might have made some new enemies. You definitely made new enemies. You also made new allies. He nodded toward a group of older gentlemen watching them with interest. Those are some of the most influential landowners in the country. If they take your ideas seriously, everything changes, Adeline finished. No pressure. But the pressure was already there. Over the next months, Adeline found herself at the center of a genuine movement. Women writing to her, asking for advice on how to enter the field. Progressive landowners implementing her techniques and seeing real results. Academic journals, actual academic journals, requesting articles about her methods. It wasn't universal acceptance. There were still plenty of people who thought she was an abomination, a threat to the natural order, proof that society was collapsing. But increasingly, those voices were being drowned out by results. 3 years after that impromptu wedding, Adeline stood in her office, significantly larger now, in a building she owned outright, and looked at the applications spread across her desk. 23 women wanting to apprentice with her firm. 23 women who'd heard that Adeline Crow had built something from nothing and wanted to do the same. We can't take them all, her head clerk pointed out. James, a young man who'd been with her since the beginning. We don't have the capacity. Then we'll expand the capacity. Adeline picked up one of the applications, a girl from a minor noble family who'd been told her only value was her ability to marry well. Every single one of these women has been told she's not good enough, smart enough, strong enough. I'm not turning them away because of capacity issues. We'll figure it out. You're going to work yourself to death. Probably, but I'll die doing something that matters. That evening, Adeline returned to the estate, home now, truly home in a way her parents' house never had been. Rowan was in his study, reviewing his own estate reports. They'd fallen into an easy partnership over the years, often working side by side in comfortable silence. 23 applications, she told him, collapsing into the chair across from his desk. Are you taking them all? Yes. Of course you are. He set down his pen. You know you don't have to save everyone, right? You're allowed to have limits. I'm not trying to save everyone. I'm just trying to give them the chance I had to give myself. Adeline leaned back, suddenly exhausted. Is that wrong? No, but it is a lot, and I worry you're going to burn out trying to prove something that you've already proved. Have I, though? The question came out more vulnerable than she intended. Sometimes I still feel like I'm that girl at the altar, waiting to be validated by people who will never think I'm good enough. Rowan came around the desk and knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands. You're the woman who turned public humiliation into a thriving business. Who changed an entire industry's perspective on who can and can't do this work? Who speaks at conferences and gets standing ovations from people who used to mock her? What more proof do you need? I don't know. That's the problem. Adeline looked down at their joined hands. Part of me knows I've succeeded beyond anything I imagined 4 years ago, but there's still this voice in my head saying it could all disappear tomorrow. That I'm one mistake away from being that abandoned bride again. That's not how this works. Success doesn't evaporate because you make a mistake, and you're not defined by that day anymore. You've made sure of that. Have I? Or am I just running faster so it can't catch up to me? The question hung in the air. Rowan was quiet for a long moment. Come with me, he said finally, standing and pulling her up. There's something I want to show you. He led her through the estate to a room she rarely entered. The formal portrait gallery where paintings of Rowan's ancestors stared down with varying degrees of disapproval. But he didn't stop at the old portraits. He led her to the far end where new paintings hung. One of them was her. Adeline stared at her own image, painted sometime in the last year without her knowledge. In the portrait, she stood in her office, ledgers spread before her, expression focused and competent. She looked powerful, certain. Nothing like the broken girl from 4 years ago. When did you? 6 months ago. I commissioned it after your conference speech. Rowan stood beside her, looking at the painting. This is how I see you, how everyone who matters sees you, not as someone who was abandoned, but as someone who built something extraordinary from the ruins of what should have destroyed her. Adeline felt tears building. It's just a painting. It's history, your history, in a gallery with dukes and duchesses going back 3 centuries. Someday people will look at this, and they won't know about Marcus, or the altar, or any of it. They'll just see a woman who changed the world. He turned to face her. That's your legacy, not the scandal, the change. The tears fell then, hot and relieved. Rowan pulled her close, and she let herself cry against his shoulder, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming recognition that he was right. She'd been so focused on running from her past that she'd failed to notice she'd already outrun it. I love you, she said when she could speak again. I know. I love you too. Rowan kissed the top of her head. Now can we please go have dinner? I'm starving, and you've had an exhausting day of saving the world. They ate in the small dining room, just the two of them, talking about everything and nothing. It was ordinary, domestic, boring in the best possible way. The kind of evening Adeline had thought she'd never have, simple happiness with someone who knew all her scars and loved her anyway. Later, lying in bed with Rowan asleep beside her, Adeline thought about that portrait. About the woman in the painting who looked so confident, so certain of her place in the world. For the first time, she recognized herself in that image. The abandoned bride was gone. Had been gone for years, probably, but Adeline had been too busy running to notice. In her place was someone new, someone stronger, sharper, forged in public humiliation and private determination. Someone who'd taken her worst moment and turned it into fuel for the best years of her life. The next morning, Adeline accepted all 23 apprenticeship applications. Then she started planning the expansion, more office space, more training programs, a formal curriculum for women entering estate management. It was ambitious, possibly insane, but she'd built her entire career on ambitious insanity. Within a year, Crow Estate Management had trained over 50 women. Within 2, the number doubled. Within 3, other firms started copying her model, grudgingly admitting that maybe women could do this work after all. The scandal of the abandoned bride faded into history, replaced by new gossip, new scandals, newer dramas. Occasionally someone would bring it up, usually with malicious intent. But Adeline found it didn't sting anymore. It was just a thing that had happened, not the defining moment of her existence. On the 5-year anniversary of that impromptu wedding, Rowan surprised her with a party. Not a huge society event, but an intimate gathering of people who'd been part of her journey. Mr. Ashford, Mrs. Hewitt, her apprentices, the landowners who'd taken a chance on her methods, even a few of the men who'd initially opposed her but had grudgingly come around. They gathered in the same garden where Rowan had first proposed, where Adeline had run in fear, unable to imagine trusting anyone with her heart. Now it was filled with people celebrating not just her marriage, but everything she'd built. Speech, someone called out. Others took up the cry. Adeline stood, glass of champagne in hand, and looked around at the faces watching her. These were her people, the ones who'd believed in her when she barely believed in herself. 5 years ago, she began, I stood in a chapel and did possibly the most impulsive thing I've ever done. I proposed to a man I was terrified of loving in front of everyone who'd watched me fail, at the exact location of my greatest humiliation. The laughter rippled through the crowd. Rowan grinned up at her from his seat. It was insane, dramatic, completely reckless. And it was also the moment I stopped letting fear control my life. Adeline raised her glass. I spent 4 years building walls to protect myself. Walls made of work and anger and the determination to never be vulnerable again. But walls don't just keep pain out. They keep everything out. Love, connection, the possibility of actually being happy instead of just surviving. She looked at Rowan. You showed me that safety and strength aren't the same thing. That real strength is being brave enough to risk pain because the alternative, living behind walls forever, is its own kind of death. Get to the point, Rowan called out, eyes twinkling. You're getting sentimental. The point, Adeline said, is thank you, to all of you, for seeing me as more than my worst day, for giving me chances I didn't deserve, and believing I could succeed when I wasn't sure I believed it myself. For proving that the world isn't just cruel people waiting to tear you down, it's also good people waiting to lift you up if you let them. She raised her glass higher. So here's to second chances, to turning pain into power, to refusing to be broken by the things that should have destroyed us, and to the radical idea that maybe, just maybe, we're all stronger than we think we are. The toast was enthusiastic, glasses clinking, voices raised in agreement. As the party continued around her, Adeline found herself standing apart for a moment, just watching. These people, this life. This was what she'd built from the ashes of that altar. Not just a business or a reputation, but a community, a purpose, a legacy that had nothing to do with scandal and everything to do with change. Years later, when Adeline was older and her hair had started to gray, she would occasionally visit that chapel. Not as penance or punishment, but as a reminder of how far she'd traveled. She'd stand in front of the altar where she'd once waited for a man who never came, and she'd remember the girl she'd been, scared, abandoned, certain her life was over. That girl had been wrong. Her life hadn't ended that day. It had begun. By then, Crow Estate Management would have trained hundreds of women. Adeline's methods would be taught in universities. The idea of women in estate management would have gone from scandalous to standard practice, and Adeline herself would be known not as the abandoned bride, but as the woman who'd revolutionized an industry. But on this night, 5 years after the impromptu wedding, she was just Adeline. Standing in her garden, surrounded by people who'd helped her become the woman she'd fought so hard to be. Rowan appeared at her elbow, sliding an arm around her waist. "Happy?" he asked quietly. Adeline leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence, the certainty of his love. She thought about the promises she'd written 4 years ago, vows to never be powerless, never rely on anyone, never let herself be vulnerable again. She'd broken every single one of those promises. And in breaking them, she'd found something better. "Yes," she said, "I'm happy." It was the truth. Not the careful, qualified truth she'd have given 4 years ago, hedging against future pain. Just simple, honest happiness. The kind that came from building a life worth living instead of just surviving. The party continued into the night. Laughter and conversation filling the garden. Adeline stayed in the center of it, no longer the girl who hid behind walls, but the woman who'd torn them down and built something beautiful in their place. The chapel stood empty across the city, its Gothic spires dark against the evening sky. No one waited at its altar tonight. No one would abandon anyone in its pews. It was just a building, stone and glass and history. But if those walls could speak, they might tell 2 stories. The first, of a girl left alone and broken, humiliated in front of everyone who mattered. The second, of a woman who returned years later and turned her greatest shame into her greatest triumph. Both stories were true. Both were hers. But only one defined her. And that made all the difference.